Did Jesus of Nazareth, who started one of the most influential religions in history, really live? And if he did, what do we actually know about his actions and words? Are there any evidences outside of the Bible that prove the existence of the Jesus mentioned in the New Testament? Historians of various beliefs, from atheists to Christians, generally agree that he did indeed exist. They also find it likely that some of the major events in his life, as reported in the New Testament, actually happened. However, recently many people have begun to doubt the reality of his existence, and the stories told about him is what's in the Bible true or just inventions. With that in mind, questions arise about whether there are documents or physical evidence that prove the existence of Jesus Christ. If you believe that Jesus existed, subscribe to the channel and let's explore all the details about this topic together right now. Throughout history, we humans have created many stories about incredible beings that we usually consider legends. Ancient religions are important sources of these legendary figures. For example, today almost no one believes in the actual existence of Hercules, even though stories about his adventures have been told for centuries. However, while few people still worship the gods and demigods of ancient Rome and Greece, several ancient religions are still practiced today, and their followers believe that certain historical figures really existed. Archaeologist and historian Dr. Byron McCain from Florida Atlantic University mentions, "I am not aware of any qualified historian or archaeologist who doubts the existence of Jesus of Nazareth. However, this doesn't mean there is a general consensus." For example, a survey conducted in the United Kingdom in 2015, with approximately 4,000 people, showed that 40% of them did not believe that Jesus actually existed. The Emeritus Professor of Jewish Studies in Archaeology at Duke University, Dr. Eric Mars, along with Dr. Byron McCain, agrees. "I don't know of any prominent scholar who doubts the historicity of Jesus. The details have been debated for centuries, but no serious person denies that he is a historical figure." Comparing those who deny Jesus' existence to climate change deniers is appropriate, they assert. Skeptics, on the other hand, often point out that there are no solid archaeological evidences, writings by Jesus, or contemporary documents that confirm his existence. Indeed, this is true, but if we use those criteria to verify the existence of a historical figure, we would have to deny the existence of nearly everyone in history, including some of the most important individuals. Comment below if you believe in the real existence of Jesus of Nazareth. Dr. Bart Ehrman, a New Testament scholar and atheist, points out that there are almost no archaeological records of people who lived during the time of Jesus. Even the existence of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, best known for ordering the crucifixion of Jesus, was poorly documented until 1961, when a significant archaeological discovery was made in Caesarea Maritima. Archaeologists discovered a stone, now called the Pilate stone, dating back to the time of Pontius Pilate and Jesus. Though the stone is damaged and its text incomplete, it clearly names Pilate as the prefect of Judea. Interestingly, Pilate was also described as an excellent dancer, possibly hinting that he learned dancing as part of his early education. The stone suggests that Pilate was dedicating a temple or another important structure. Before this discovery, the evidence for Pilate's existence was less clear compared to evidence for Jesus, according to Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman points out that there are multiple independent sources about Jesus' life, including the Gospels and Paul's letters. Some of these were written in Jesus' native language, Aramaic, just a year or two after his death. These early writings are valuable for understanding historical figures from that time. He argues that the evidence for Jesus' existence meets the same standard used for other ancient figures, and there's no reason to hold Jesus to a stricter one. The New Testament writings themselves provide direct evidence. While it might seem odd to use the Bible to validate itself, most historians, even secular ones, don't dismiss it as a source. Archaeological evidence has confirmed many events described in the Bible, proving they weren't simply invented later. Historians also apply the criterion of embarrassment, which suggests that people wouldn't make up stories that portray them negatively. For instance, the Gospels include unflattering details like disputes among the apostles, Peter's denial of Jesus, Jesus' struggles in Galilee, accusations of madness, doubts about his mission, and even his death as a criminal, something that deeply shocked his followers. These details add credibility to the narratives, showing that they likely contain elements of truth. Dr. Ehrman explains that traditionally, the Messiah was expected to be a powerful figure who would defeat enemies. If someone were to create a story about a Messiah, they would likely make him victorious, not someone who was humiliated, tortured, and killed by his enemies. Another scholar, Wright, points out that crucifixion went against Hellenistic beliefs, as it was a form of punishment that completely degraded the person. It also usually meant the individual wouldn't get a proper burial, as the body was left for scavengers and then dumped in a common grave. Critics sometimes question the New Testament's reliability, but the letters of Paul, written between 50 and 60 AD, just 20 to 30 years after Jesus' death, mention encounters with people who personally knew Jesus. Paul met James, Jesus' brother, and stayed with Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, in Jerusalem after his conversion. These writings appeared quickly after Jesus' death and were widely accepted, showing that during that time, almost no one doubted Jesus' existence. Many people who lived through the events were still alive, and Christianity was already spreading across Judea and parts of the Roman Empire when Paul wrote his letters. If Jesus hadn't existed, Jewish and Roman leaders, who saw Christians as a threat, would have had every reason to prove it. However, even non-Christian Jews and Romans at the time didn't question Jesus' existence. Independent sources also back this up. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing around 115 AD, references Jesus in his Annals. Tacitus describes Jesus being crucified under Pontius Pilate during Tiberius's reign and mentions how Christians were blamed by Nero for the fire in Rome. Tacitus's account confirms that Jesus was known and acknowledged as a historical figure even by non-Christian sources. Tacitus writes about a mischievous superstition that was temporarily suppressed but later spread again, starting in Judea, which he called the origin of this evil, and reaching Rome. According to Tacitus, Rome was a place where the worst atrocities and shames of the world gathered and thrived. Many people were punished, not necessarily for setting the city on fire, but for what Tacitus described as hatred against humanity. These punishments included cruel mockeries. People were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, crucified, or burned alive as human torches at night. Emperor Nero even used his gardens for these brutal displays, participating in them himself, sometimes dressed as a charioteer or standing in a chariot. Despite the accused being seen as criminals under Roman law, public sympathy grew. The cruelty of the punishments made people feel that these executions were less about justice and more about satisfying Nero's personal brutality, making the deaths seem even more unjust. Some question whether Tacitus relied solely on Christian accounts without using independent sources. This skepticism is often dismissed because Tacitus was a respected historian known for basing his work on evidence, even though much of it has been lost. As a senator, Tacitus had access to official records and was part of a group overseeing foreign religions in Rome, which likely gave him direct knowledge of Christianity at the time. Most historians, combining his reputation with other evidence, consider his account an independent and valid source for Jesus' existence. Another important historian from that era is Flavius Josephus, who was born in Jerusalem around the time Jesus was reportedly crucified. Josephus, known for documenting the deaths of tens of thousands during one of history's most tragic periods, subtly acknowledges Jesus' existence. As noted by Dr. Robert Van Voorst, if any Jewish historian could have denied Jesus' existence, it would have been Josephus. His acknowledgement challenges claims that evidence for Jesus outside the Bible is insufficient. Josephus was born in 37 AD into a wealthy and influential family in Jerusalem. His mother was from the Hasmonean dynasty, and his father was a priest. As a young man, Josephus experienced the Jewish-Roman conflict and led Jewish forces in Galilee. However, in 67 AD, during the siege of Yodfat, Josephus's forces were defeated. He and a small group hid in caves, but were eventually captured by the Romans. Most of what we know about this event comes from Josephus's own writings, which remain a subject of debate. Choosing death over capture, they decided to draw lots to see who would kill whom, starting a tragic mutual massacre, as they considered suicide a grave sin. In the end, only Josephus and one other man survived. Instead of killing each other, they chose to surrender. This decision led Josephus to gain the trust of Vespasian, the commander of the Roman forces, after he predicted Vespasian would become the emperor of Rome. Impressed, Vespasian spared Josephus and made him his slave. 2 years later, when Vespasian became emperor, he granted Josephus freedom, Roman citizenship, and began supporting the Romans. Josephus then served as an advisor and translator for Vespasian's son Titus during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Today, Josephus is more famous for his writings than these events. His book The Jewish War is one of the most detailed accounts of the Jewish history during this critical period, including the destruction of the temple and the displacement of the Jewish people. His other important work, Antiquities of the Jews, is crucial for early Christian studies, documenting life during Jesus' time and mentioning figures like Herod the Great, John the Baptist, and Pontius Pilate. Josephus aimed to stay neutral in his writings, unlike many historians of the time who tended to glorify Roman achievements while downplaying Jewish history. He wanted to accurately record the actions of both sides, which is widely recognized by historians today. In Antiquities of the Jews, written about 50 years after Jesus' execution, Josephus mentions Jesus twice. Historians agree that the 18th chapter mentioning Jesus has been altered over time, likely by Christian scribes, but the core reference to Jesus is still considered authentic. In this passage, Josephus describes Jesus as a wise man who performed extraordinary deeds and was a teacher. He attracted many followers, both Jews and Greeks. He was condemned to death by crucifixion under Pilate, but after his death, his disciples continued to believe in him, saying he appeared to them alive again, as the prophets had foretold. This group, called Christians, continues to exist today. An Arabic version of this text from the 10th century offers a slightly different view of Jesus. It emphasizes his good conduct and virtue, mentioning that his disciples claimed he appeared alive again after his death, which made them believe he was the Messiah. Though some elements of these accounts are debated, it's important to note that Josephus was a strong defender of Judaism. Referring to Jesus as the Christ might suggest that Josephus could have converted to Christianity, which doesn't align with the rest of his writings. This raises questions about whether the entire passage is a forgery. However, most historians don't fully dismiss this idea, as there are reasons to believe the reference is genuine. For example, the style and vocabulary of the text are consistent, and the second mention of Jesus suggests that Josephus had already made an earlier reference to him, as if readers were already familiar with who he was. While the first mention of Jesus has some disputed details due to possible alterations, most historians accept it as early evidence of Jesus' historical existence. The second reference appears in the 20th book and describes an incident where a new high priest executed some individuals, including James, the brother of Jesus, called the Christ. This event occurred after the Roman procurator learned of the high priest's abuse of power. Josephus is one of the earliest independent historical sources to mention Jesus, noting the commonality of the name at the time. He also stands out as one of the first to report on John the Baptist, describing how some Jews believed that Herod's downfall was a divine punishment for executing John, who had a significant influence over the people. Due to Herod's distrust, John the Baptist was imprisoned and taken to the fortress of Machaerus, where he was eventually executed. These events not only show John's influence but also the tense political and social climate of the time, where figures like John could be seen as both spiritual leaders and political threats. In addition to historians like Josephus and Tacitus, there are other references to Jesus from the same era, although these are not as widely accepted as the accounts from these two historians. One such reference comes from a letter written by Mara, a Stoic philosopher from Syria, while he was imprisoned after his city was taken by the Romans. In the letter, he questions the actions of tyrannical rulers who oppress their people, pointing to examples of Socrates, Pythagoras, and a wise Jewish king who suffered similar fates. Mara suggests that their deaths led to the downfall of their cities, and God's justice brought retribution. While this letter may be one of the earliest mentions of Jesus, it is unclear when it was written, with some dating it to 73 AD, though others believe it could have been written much later. Even if it is from 73 AD, it does not directly mention Jesus, though it seems to refer to him. Another key account is from the Roman historian Suetonius, who, in his Lives of the 12 Caesars, mentions Emperor Claudius expelling Jews from Rome around 50 AD because of riots caused by Chrestus. This event is similar to what is described in Acts 18 in the New Testament. Some believe Chrestus refers to Jesus, but the ambiguity of the name raises doubts, as it could refer to someone else or an interpretation of Jesus' teachings. Pliny the Younger also wrote about early Christians in a letter to Emperor Trajan in 112 AD. He describes Christians gathering to sing hymns to Christ and pledging not to commit immoral acts. While this shows that Christians worship Jesus, it doesn't provide much direct evidence for his historical existence, especially since Pliny only learned about Jesus from the Christians themselves. Historians today often rely on limited evidence, as they do not have access to photos or videos, and instead use standard research methods to assess historical events. In the case of Jesus, the majority of historians agree that Jesus of Nazareth did exist and that he was likely baptized by John the Baptist. Many also believe that Jesus gathered followers and spread teachings similar to John's. As biblical scholar John Dominic Crossan put it, while John had a following, Jesus built upon it, creating a movement that continued even after John's death. Some of John's followers remained active into the 2nd century AD. It is widely accepted that Jesus eventually angered both Jewish and Roman leaders, leading to his crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. After his death, his followers continued spreading his teachings, often facing persecution. While there is debate over whether everything recorded in the New Testament is historically accurate, most historians treat it as a reliable source for understanding Jesus' teachings, even if some details may have been modified over time. Similar to Socrates, where his disciples recorded his words long after his death, the teachings of Jesus were written down decades after his death, based partly on oral traditions. While the exact words of Jesus are unknown, the general aspects of his teachings are believed to be preserved, even if later interpretations were added. Despite some questioning Jesus' existence, professional historians consider his existence to be as certain as that of any other well-known historical figure. As Dr. Eric Meyer points out, those who deny the existence of Jesus are comparable to those who deny climate change.